So this is the Jondaryan Woolshed. Glenn's got a thing for woolsheds.
Now this video may be a bit long-winded, but I thought it was important to capture what John has said about the Jondaryan Woolshed and its history. I'll include all our photos and footage from the woolshed.
Farm that was broken off what was previously Jondaryan Station was the farm that had the shed on it. And at the end of the war there was a complete and utter dearth of building materials of any kind.
Oh, okay.
The war had taken everything.
So they nearly robbed it out.
And the farmer that got this farm here, he had farm machinery that he wanted to put in a shed, but he couldn't get anything to build a shed with. So he had a brother-in-law who was in the same boat as him, and they decided they would use this western wing of the woolshed, and they completely gutted it, took everything out of it, all the infrastructure out of it. What you see on the other end is the original.
Right.
Yep.
And it was exactly the same. It was a mirror image on this end.
Oh, okay. Right.
And sheep came in from both ends of the shed and went through the shearing boards, which were down along both sides. And the wool ended up in the middle of the shed. And they processed it there. And then it went into the wool wing where it was pressed and branded and everything they had to do to it, and dumped, ready to go onto the sailing ships.
Right. So they gutted this area to make it a machinery shed, basically.
Yeah. What was here was, you can see what was here on the other end.
On the other end, yeah.
When we
came around last night.
This western half, this western wing, was taken away to the brother-in-law's farm.
Right.
And all these posts that you see holding up the roof structure,
Yep.
they are whole tree trunks.
Oh.
Underneath the floor, a foot under the floor, there's still whole tree trunks, and they're about that freaking round.
Yeah, right.
And they go 7 feet into the ground. And the brother-in-law was not going to dig them out.
Yeah.
So he got his chainsaw, and where they're squared up from under the floor, he just cut them all off.
Right.
And took them away.
Yeah.
Lowered the roof right down, but he could still get his tractor in, so he didn't care.
Yeah, right. Okay.
When we were given the woolshed in 1973, it was presented to the woolshed because they no longer had any need for it. And the first thing we did was go chasing this missing end of the woolshed. And the man that had it was tight as the proverbial fishes. And he wasn't going to let it go for him. And we kept at him, eventually wore him down.
Right, okay.
He said, all right, you can have the bloody thing, but you've got to build me a state-of-the-art machinery shed to get it.
Oh, okay. So, was
And
it far away?
all we could get back from him that we could use were the roof trusses.
Yeah, okay.
Did you build the
The
machinery
posts
shed?
were wrecked. The iron had been all painted and we couldn't use that. So we got that back. We managed to track down enough trees to make the new posts with.
Yep.
And put them in and assembled it all. And there was an old shearing shed which was being wrecked, which had the same iron on as this shed originally had.
Ah, okay.
And we got just enough to do it, and placed all that old iron. But it wasn't really enough. We needed another run of iron right through to do it properly, because we couldn't overlap the iron.
Ah, yes, yeah.
And when it rains, particularly in blowing rain, it comes in. You can see all the cracks in the roof there everywhere. And it just, water all blows in through there, and you get just about as wet inside the shed as outside the shed. But this shed was built, they started building it back in 1859.
It seems to be older than the ones down in the Darling River.
It's the first of the big shearing sheds.
Right.
It predates all the others by a long way. And, it was actually the one that showed them how they could develop the industry on a grand scale.
Right, okay.
And because prior to the building of this shed, the biggest shed in the world was a 10-stand shed.
Oh, okay.
And this is a 52-stand shed.
52.
It was only 10.
Which is more than 5 times the size of the biggest, which they thought was as big as you could go.
Yeah. Okay.
And but William Kent, who is the man who had the inspiration for this, he didn't want to run thousands of sheep. He wanted to run hundreds of thousands of sheep. And he wanted a shearing shed capable of handling 250,000 sheep every year.
Right.
And he was dead lucky. He knew what he wanted, but he didn't know how to design it or build it.
Oh, okay.
But he was dead lucky because here on Jondaryan Station at that time, there was a man managing Jondaryan Station when they took over, who was managed for the previous owners, who was a qualified architect and had been working as a rural architect for the AA company down in New South Wales, which was the first of the big national companies. And he had experimented with and eventually got the best possible design for a shearing shed. He built several sheds for the AA company, but all 10-stand sheds.
Yeah, right.
And when William Kent asked him if he could design and build a shed to shear 250,000 sheep, most people would have thrown up their hands and, all right, you can't do it.
Yep.
But not James Charles White. He was a man that thought outside the square like William Kent.
Right.
And he said, no problem, I've designed the perfect design for a shearing shed. All I need to do is upscale that and put 2 shearing sheds together, end for end. And that's what they did.
And have a centre.
It's just 2 shearing sheds. The sheep came in from that end and from this end. Was shorn on the boards on each side.
Yep.
And the wool ended up in the middle of the shed. In the old design, they ended up in the far end of the shed. But in this design, they ended up in the middle. And then he built the wing, the T stem of the shed to it, which was the wool handling area, where all the wool was classed and pressed, and then they stacked all the wool bales in there until they were ready to be shipped out, and then they dumped each bale, and they had a big water hydraulic operated press.
Oh, okay.
And they would put a whole bale in that press, and it would squash it down to 1/3 of its size.
Yep.
And then they bound that up with iron straps, and that's how it went into the sailing ships.
Right.
Because the problem was that the sailing ships didn't have a big hole. They had very small holes, and you couldn't get much in.
How did they get it from here to the ship?
They put it onto first of all bullock wagons, and then horse wagons, and carted it down to the nearest port. In the earliest days, it had to go down to Maitland, and then it was shipped down to Sydney, and from Sydney it went on to the international sailing ships.
Okay. So it went to Maitland.
Went back to England.
Maitland in Queensland.
Oh, Maitland in Queensland.
Yeah.
Not Maitland in
No,
New South
Maitland
Wales.
in New South Wales.
Maitland, New South Wales,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
There's no Maitland in Queensland.
No, I didn't. Yeah.
Maitland in Victoria, I think.
Yeah. That's the explorer Alan Cunningham had discovered a pass through the Liverpool range that you could get wheeled vehicles through.
Oh, okay.
And that's how all the early settlers came here. They came up to Maitland and then went up the Hunter River and then crossed through Pandora's Pass in the Liverpool range
Right.
onto the western side of the ranges.
Right.
And then they were able to go all the way up without having to cross another range.
Right. Okay.
And that made it much easier going for them. And they could get the wagons and everything through that pass. And that's the only pass along the range where they could get wagons through.
Right. Okay.
And they found other passes later on which weren't anywhere near as good as Pandora's Pass, where they were able to get wagons up and down, bringing loaded wagons up, but hooking two teams together to bring a single wagon up.
Have to look it up.
And
See where
when they were going
Pandora's
down, because it was so steep, the wagon would overrun the team.
Yeah.
The brakes wouldn't hold it.
Yep.
So what the teamsters did was they would cut down a big tree up the top and tie it onto the back of the wagon.
Oh, slow.
And that acted as a brake.
Handbrake.
And after a few years of that occurring, there was such a big heap of trees down the bottom.
Yeah.
The fella started a sawmill there.
Oh, okay. Right.
He didn't have to cart any timber, he had it all there cut ready for him.
Because we came from Newcastle
Yeah,
and we went through Tamworth and up Moonby
yeah,
Hill,
yeah.
and there was book team information
Yes,
there.
yes.
But so I thought that would be a hell of
Yeah.
a ride for a bullock team going down that hill.
Yeah, most of the passes that they had used in the early days are no longer used.
Yep.
The only one that they really used was two of them. When Cunningham came and discovered the Downs in 1826, he came around the end of the range out near Warwick.
Yep.
That was the end of the range, and he came around there onto the Darling Downs, which was a vast open grass plain.
Right.
No trees,
No trees. Yeah.
open grass plain. The only trees that could grow on the downs were along the permanent water courses, and they grew along the banks of the creeks and rivers. The Darling Downs was settled in 1840, and all the settlers that came here, they were coming to the most isolated settlement in Australia.
Right.
There was none quite as isolated. And to give you an idea how isolated it was, a bullock wagon team going to get more supplies for the settler would have to go the way that they came in.
Right. Okay.
And go back to Maitland to get it. That was a long and convoluted wreck.
That's about 1,000
to
k's on
get
a bullock.
supplies.
Yeah.
And they would be saying goodbye to that wagon here on the Downs, and they wouldn't see it again for 18 months.
Yeah.
That's if everything went well. If they struck wet weather or something like that on the way, it might be 2 years before they got back.
Wow.
And none of the settlers could handle that. And most of them all went broke
Yeah. Right.
in the early days. It was only those that had a lot of resources behind them and brought the resources with them. They had to have enough resources to last them for a minimum of 3 years without any resupply.
Right.
If they didn't have that, they couldn't survive and they couldn't develop their property and get it productive. So as a result, in the early days, most of the stations changed hands many times.
Right.
And Jondaryan was in that same boat. And for the first 17 years of its settlement, up until 1858, it changed hands 8 times. None of those that took it on could develop it or do anything with it.
Yeah.
So it was an undeveloped property when Kent and Weenholt took over, and they started developing it. And then over a 10-year period, they spent the equivalent in today's money of $10 million to develop it.
Wow. Well, thanks for your time.
Yeah.
Well,
Thank you.
we've got to keep on going.
Yep.
And you've got to plant those seedlings.
Yeah.
It's good to get a bit more background on the shed,
Yeah.
because we
Yeah, well, it was the first of the big ones, and it showed the way, not only how to build the big sheds, but how to manage massive amounts of sheep, because there was 250,000 sheep on Jondaryan.
Yeah.
And that was a big flock, but some of the other big stations that were developed later on had a lot more sheep than that.
Thanks for watching.